Lauren Ashley was 18 years old, and by every measure, her life was only beginning. She was the kind of person whose presence was immediately felt, energetic, warm, constantly moving from one commitment to the next. Music, sports, theater, volunteering, her days were full, and she loved it that way. To those who knew her, Lauren wasn't just busy. She was purposeful. She had grown up in Massachusetts, raised by parents who believed deeply in education, discipline, and kindness. Her childhood was structured but loving, and from an early age Lauren learned to give as much as she received. Even after her parents divorced, they remained closely involved in her life, united by their devotion to their only child. Lauren was small in stature but impossible to overlook. She sang wherever she could, school events, community gatherings, church performances. Her voice was strong and expressive, and music became one of the ways she connected most deeply with others. At the same time, she excelled academically, played multiple sports, and took part in charitable work that extended far beyond what was expected of someone her age. By high school, Lauren was everywhere. She joined teams, performed on stage, organized events, and volunteered relentlessly. Friends joked that she never seemed to rest. Teachers admired her drive. Younger students looked up to her. She had a rare ability to make people feel seen and supported, and many turned to her when they needed help or encouragement. It was during these years that Lauren became close with Nathaniel Fuja. Nathan was a standout athlete, tall and disciplined, known primarily for his success on the football field. He and Lauren had known each other for years before they began dating, and when they did, the relationship quickly became serious. To those around them, they appeared well-matched, popular, ambitious, deeply connected. Their relationship lasted through most of high school. At first, it was marked by shared routines, mutual friends, and the intensity that often defines first love, but over time, cracks began to appear. Arguments became more frequent. Breakups were followed by reconciliations, only for the same conflicts to resurface again. Lauren changed as she grew older. Her focus shifted toward the future: college, independence, the life she wanted to build beyond her hometown. Nathan, meanwhile, struggled with the idea of losing her. His jealousy became more noticeable, his need for control more pronounced. By her senior year, Lauren began to understand that the relationship no longer aligned with who she was becoming. The emotional strain was constant, and the future she envisioned did not include the same patterns she had grown used to. On her 18th birthday, in April of 2011, Lauren made a decision she had been considering for some time. She ended the relationship, believing it was the healthiest choice for both of them. For her, it felt like closure. For Nathan, it felt like everything had been taken away. The search for Lauren began with urgency and fear. As word spread that she had failed to meet her friends and never returned home, dozens of people gathered at the beach parking lot where her red Jeep had been found. The vehicle sat in the soft evening light, windows partially rolled down, purse on the front seat. Her keys were still in the ignition. Nothing appeared stolen or disturbed. It was as if she had stepped away for a moment and vanished. Police cordoned off the area and began interviewing anyone who might have seen her. Local news cameras arrived. Volunteers combed the shoreline in both directions, flashlights sweeping across the sand and marsh grasses long into the night. Boats were deployed to search the shallows. By dawn, search dogs and officers on horseback had joined the effort. Chatter on social media surged with pleas for any information about her whereabouts. Investigators immediately focused on reconstructing Lauren's last known movements. Surveillance footage from the mall showed her leaving the building around 6:45 p.m. Phone pressed to her ear. Text messages and call logs revealed she had been in contact with Nathan earlier that day. He told police Lauren had called him on her way out of work. They had planned to meet briefly at his parents' house so he could give her something. According to Nathan, she never arrived. That detail, that she had agreed to see him despite the breakup, troubled her friends. They later recalled that Nathan had been persistent about seeing Lauren again, pressing her to talk in private. She had resisted for weeks but finally relented, telling her best friend that she wanted to get closure. On the morning of July 4th, as news of the missing teenager spread beyond their town, searchers expanded their efforts. Helicopters flew overhead. The local fire department and state police joined the operation. Lauren's father wandered the edges of the marsh and woodland, calling her name until his voice gave out. He refused to rest, even as exhaustion set in. Shortly after noon, a man riding his bicycle along a remote dirt path near Wayland's southern edge noticed something odd in a shallow cove off a small pond. There, partially submerged among reeds and mud, lay what appeared to be a bundle of dark clothing. As he approached, he realized with horror that it was a human body. He immediately called 911. Police arrived quickly, securing the area and gently recovering the remains from the water. The body was wrapped in layers of seaweed and reeds, as if someone had tried to disguise it. A necklace with a small charm was still around her neck. Identification confirmed what everyone feared. It was Lauren. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been strangled and her throat had been slashed. The cause of death was homicide. The discovery transformed the missing person case into a murder investigation and shattered any last hope of a safe return. News crews that had been covering the search now reported on a tragedy. Candlelight vigils were hastily organized that evening. People gathered in shock, holding hands, whispering prayers, trying to make sense of the senseless. Investigators redoubled their efforts. They canvassed the area where the body was found, searching for any physical evidence that might link the killer to the scene. They scoured Lauren's Jeep for prints, fibers, DNA. They reviewed phone records, social media messages, and security footage from nearby businesses. Friends and family were interviewed repeatedly to piece together Lauren's final hours. Attention naturally shifted to the last person known to have had contact with her, Nathaniel Fuja. He was cooperative when first questioned. He said he had stayed home all evening, playing video games and texting with friends. He insisted that he never saw Lauren, that she never showed up, and that he assumed she had changed her mind about meeting. Investigators noted his calm demeanor, but also the inconsistencies in his story. Cell phone records placed him away from his house during the time he claimed to be home. Neighbors reported seeing him drive away in his red Nissan late in the evening, returning hours later. Still, suspicion alone was not enough. Detectives needed physical evidence to link him to the crime. They began the meticulous process of obtaining warrants, searching his property, and reconstructing a timeline that would either support or dismantle his alibi. Meanwhile, Lauren's community was left to grapple with grief. Flowers piled up near her Jeep. Messages of love and sorrow filled social media feeds. A promising life had been brutally ended. The pressing question remained: who had taken her and why? As investigators worked through the evidence, small details began to surface that challenged Nathan's account of the night. Phone records showed a pattern of repeated calls between him and Lauren in the hours before she disappeared. One of those calls occurred just as she was leaving the mall, confirming that they had spoken moments before she vanished. When asked again about this, Nathan adjusted his story slightly, saying Lauren had planned to stop by his house briefly but must have changed her mind. Police were not convinced. On the afternoon of July 4th, officers returned to Nathan's home to speak with him again. This time, he was gone. His parents said they did not know where he was and insisted they had not seen him since early that morning. The timing raised immediate concern. Less than 24 hours after Lauren's body had been found, the last person known to have contact with her had disappeared. With growing urgency, investigators obtained a search warrant for the Fuja residence. They began in the garage. What they found changed the entire trajectory of the case. On the concrete floor, faint but unmistakable traces of blood were visible. More blood appeared near the door handle, inside the sink, and in the bathroom drain, as though someone had attempted to clean up in a hurry. Luminol testing later revealed far more blood than could be seen with the naked eye, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place inside the home. In the basement, detectives discovered a large sports bag containing a pair of shoes heavily coated in mud. In the attic, accessed by a ladder from Nathan's bedroom, they found additional footwear and clothing stained with blood. The mud on the shoes was thick, dark, and consistent with the marshland where Lauren's body had been recovered. Forensic testing would later confirm the worst. The blood belonged to Lauren. At that point, Nathan Fuja was officially named a suspect and placed on a statewide alert. Police began tracking his movements, contacting relatives and friends, checking known hangouts. Late that night, officers located him at a family member's home in a nearby town. He was arrested without incident shortly after midnight on July 4, 2011. Nathan did not resist. He did not ask questions. He did not explain himself. He was charged with the murder of Lauren Ashley. During questioning, Nathan remained largely silent. He stared at the table, offered minimal responses, and showed little outward emotion. Detectives noted his detached demeanor, uncertain whether it stemmed from shock, fear, or something else entirely. He neither confessed nor denied responsibility in a meaningful way. As news of the arrest spread, the community struggled to process the reality of what had happened. Many people had known both Lauren and Nathan for years. They had attended the same schools, shared the same social circles, and been viewed as a familiar couple. The idea that their relationship could end in violence was almost impossible to accept. Lauren's parents were informed of the arrest only hours after identifying their daughter's body. Grief collided with disbelief. The man accused of killing their child was someone they had welcomed into their home, someone they had trusted. In the days that followed, prosecutors began assembling their case. Evidence from the Fuja home, phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements painted a disturbing picture. Investigators concluded that Lauren had gone to Nathan's house voluntarily that evening, believing the meeting would be brief and harmless. What happened next would become the central question of the trial. An autopsy revealed that Lauren had suffered defensive wounds, indicating she had fought back. She had been strangled with an elastic cord before her throat was slashed. The medical examiner determined that she had remained alive for several minutes after the initial attack. Prosecutors believed the crime was not spontaneous. They argued it was the culmination of obsession, jealousy, and an inability to accept rejection. Nathan was held without bail as the case moved toward court. For Lauren's family, there was no relief in knowing an arrest had been made. Their daughter was gone. Nothing would bring her back. All that remained was the long, painful process of seeking justice and understanding how a relationship that began with affection had ended in irreversible loss. As the legal process began, new details emerged that deepened the understanding of what had led to Lauren's death. During pretrial hearings, prosecutors introduced evidence of Nathan's behavior in the years before the murder, incidents that, at the time, had been dismissed as immaturity or jealousy, but now appeared far more concerning. One such incident occurred during a school dance 2 years earlier. Lauren, temporarily separated from Nathan during one of their many breakups, attended the event with friends. She danced with another boy and shared a brief moment that seemed harmless at the time. Nathan arrived unexpectedly. Witnesses later recalled him confronting the boy aggressively, shoving him and threatening him, warning him never to go near Lauren again. The incident ended without police involvement and was largely forgotten, but in retrospect it revealed a pattern of possessiveness and explosive anger. Friends testified that Nathan's jealousy intensified whenever alcohol was involved. While there had never been reported physical abuse during the relationship, many recalled moments when his temper flared quickly and unpredictably. Lauren had spoken privately to friends about feeling emotionally drained and increasingly uneasy around him in the final months before the breakup. In contrast, the defense painted a very different picture of Nathan. His attorneys argued that he was not a calculated killer but a deeply disturbed young man suffering from severe mental illness. They emphasized how dramatically his behavior had changed after the breakup: his withdrawal, depression, substance use, and abandonment of long-term goals. According to the defense, these were not signs of obsession, but of a mind unraveling. Medical experts were called to testify about Nathan's mental state. One psychiatrist diagnosed him with major depressive disorder, suggesting that the breakup had triggered a severe psychological collapse. The defense also pointed to Nathan's history of head injuries from years of playing football, arguing that repeated concussions may have impaired his impulse control and judgment. The defense's central claim was that on the night of July 3rd, Nathan experienced a dissociative episode. They argued that when Lauren arrived at his house intending only a brief conversation, something in his mind fractured. According to this version of events, he did not fully understand his actions as they occurred. His body acted, they claimed, while his conscious mind was disconnected from reality. Prosecutors rejected this explanation entirely. They argued that Nathan's actions before and after the murder demonstrated clear awareness and intent. He had called Lauren multiple times that day. He had ensured his parents were not home. After the killing, he attempted to clean the scene, hid blood-stained clothing, switched shoes, disposed of evidence, abandoned Lauren's Jeep at the beach, and transported her body to a remote marsh. Each of these steps, prosecutors said, required planning, decision-making, and an understanding of right and wrong. They also revealed testimony from a relative who said Nathan had made chilling remarks after the murder, including a statement that the weapon used would never be found. To prosecutors, this was not the language of someone unaware of their actions. It was the language of someone trying to avoid consequences. As the trial approached, both families prepared themselves for weeks of painful testimony. For Lauren's parents, every detail reopened the wound of loss. For Nathan's parents, the proceedings forced them to confront the possibility that their son was capable of something unimaginable. The trial began in February 2013, nearly 18 months after Lauren's death. The courtroom was filled each day with friends, relatives, and members of the community, all seeking answers. At its core, the trial revolved around one question: was this a crime driven by mental illness or a deliberate act fueled by obsession and rage? The jury would have to decide. The evidence would speak. Over the course of the trial, jurors were presented with a detailed reconstruction of Lauren's final hours. Prosecutors walked them step by step through the timeline, emphasizing the moments that, in their view, revealed intent rather than confusion. Phone records showed Nathan calling Lauren repeatedly on July 3rd. One of those calls connected as she exited the mall. Shortly after, her phone stopped transmitting data altogether. The prosecution argued that Nathan persuaded Lauren to come to his house by presenting the meeting as brief and harmless. They reminded the jury that Lauren had plans afterward and no reason to disappear voluntarily. When she arrived, according to the state, the encounter quickly escalated. The attack occurred in the garage where evidence of blood and a struggle had been found. Forensic experts testified that Lauren had suffered defensive injuries, cuts, and abrasions consistent with attempts to protect herself. This, they said, contradicted the defense's claim of a sudden, uncontrollable dissociative episode. Lauren had fought back. She had tried to survive. After the killing, prosecutors said, Nathan made a series of deliberate choices. He cleaned the garage and sinks. He removed his blood-stained boots and clothing. He hid items in the attic and basement. He drove Lauren's Jeep to the beach and left it there to suggest she had gone for a walk or entered the water. He discarded the keys. He then transported her body to a marsh, choosing a location he believed would conceal it. Each action, the prosecution argued, demonstrated awareness, problem-solving, and an effort to evade detection. The defense countered by calling their own experts. A forensic psychiatrist testified that severe depression, combined with substance abuse and possible brain trauma from football, could impair a person's ability to control impulses. According to this expert, Nathan's mental state at the time of the killing rendered him incapable of appreciating the wrongfulness of his actions. They emphasized his behavior after the arrest: his silence, his emotional flatness, his apparent lack of immediate remorse. To them, these were not signs of calculation, but of psychological collapse. The prosecution challenged this interpretation. They presented another expert who testified that Nathan's actions were inconsistent with insanity. This expert pointed out that individuals experiencing true dissociative states rarely engage in complex concealment behaviors afterward. Planning, cleanup, and deception suggested cognitive awareness. As testimony continued, the emotional toll became visible. Lauren's mother sat quietly, often staring at the table in front of her. Her father listened intently, sometimes closing his eyes as details of the violence were described. Nathan's parents sat together, rigid and pale, struggling with the weight of what they were hearing. When closing arguments began, both sides distilled the case into its essence. The defense asked the jury to see Nathan as a young man whose mind had broken under pressure, someone in need of treatment rather than condemnation. The prosecution asked them to focus on Lauren, on her choices being taken from her, on the deliberate steps that ended her life and attempted to erase responsibility. After weeks of testimony, the case was handed to the jury. They deliberated for hours, reviewing evidence, testimony, and expert opinions. Each decision carried enormous weight. One outcome would define the rest of Nathan Fuja's life. Another would determine how Lauren Ashley's death would be remembered under the law. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the room fell silent. The verdict was delivered on March 7, 2013. After a full day of deliberation, the jury found Nathan Fuja guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder. The decision confirmed the prosecution's argument that the killing had been intentional and premeditated. There would be no reduced charge, no finding of legal insanity. Under Massachusetts law, the sentence for first-degree murder was mandatory: life in prison. As the verdict was read, reactions in the courtroom were restrained but heavy with emotion. Nathan stood motionless, his expression difficult to read. Only when the reality of the sentence became undeniable did his composure begin to falter. His shoulders slumped. His breathing changed. For the first time since the trial began, he appeared to fully register what his actions had cost. Lauren's parents remained seated, absorbing the outcome in silence. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served, but no verdict could restore what they had lost. Their daughter was still gone. The future she had planned would never exist. In a moment that stunned those in attendance, Malcolm Ashley crossed the courtroom after the sentencing and embraced Nathan's parents. It was a gesture born not of forgiveness, but of understanding. Two families had been destroyed by the same act. One had lost a daughter. The other had lost a son to prison and to the knowledge of what he had done. Nathan was formally sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, as required by law at the time. He was 20 years old. In the weeks that followed, the community tried to move forward. Vigils turned into memorials. Scholarships were created in Lauren's name. Her friends prepared for college carrying grief alongside hope, aware that their lives were continuing while hers had ended. Lauren's parents chose not to retreat into private sorrow. Instead, they dedicated themselves to prevention. They spoke openly about relationship violence, warning signs, and the dangers of obsession masked as love. They shared Lauren's story in schools and community programs, determined that her death would not be meaningless. They also established a foundation in her name, focused on art, youth involvement, and healthy relationships. It reflected who Lauren had been: creative, compassionate, and deeply engaged with the world around her. Years passed, but the case never truly faded. It remained a point of reference whenever discussions arose about teenage relationships, emotional dependency, and the escalation of unchecked jealousy. Lauren's story became a reminder that violence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, behind familiar faces and trusted connections. In 2024, more than a decade after the murder, a change in Massachusetts law reopened old wounds. The state's highest court ruled that individuals who committed crimes under the age of 20 could no longer be automatically sentenced to life without parole. Instead, they would be eligible for future parole hearings. For Lauren's parents, the decision was devastating. The thought that Nathan Fuja might one day seek release forced them to relive the trauma they had spent years trying to endure. They feared not just the possibility of parole, but the message it might send about accountability and loss. Once again, Lauren's name appeared in headlines. Once again, her family was asked to speak about the worst day of their lives. And once again, they did. They spoke not out of anger, but out of love for the daughter they would never stop missing, and out of a determination to protect others from the same fate. The story was not over. In the years following the trial, the public narrative surrounding the case shifted. What had once been a story of a shocking crime became, for many, a broader discussion about youth violence, mental health, and the fine line between emotional instability and criminal responsibility. Experts debated the role of depression, substance abuse, and adolescent brain development. Others focused on patterns of control and obsession that often precede relationship violence. For Lauren's family, these debates were difficult to hear. They did not deny that mental health mattered, or that young people could struggle profoundly. But they also knew that their daughter had made a clear choice to leave a relationship she no longer felt safe or fulfilled in. That choice, they believed, should never have carried a death sentence. As time passed, Lauren's memory remained vivid within her community. Friends who had once walked the halls of high school with her graduated from college, started careers, and built families of their own. Many spoke openly about how her life and her death shaped their understanding of love and boundaries. Some said they learned to recognize red flags they might otherwise have ignored. Others said they learned how important it was to speak up when something felt wrong. Nathan, meanwhile, faded from public view. In prison, he lived a tightly controlled existence, far removed from the world he had once known. Court records showed no public statements of remorse. Appeals were filed and denied. The conviction stood. When the legal landscape changed in Massachusetts, the possibility of parole for those sentenced as young adults reopened conversations the community had hoped were settled. Media outlets revisited old files. Reporters contacted Lauren's parents for comment. Each inquiry brought the past rushing back. Lauren's parents spoke carefully and consistently. They emphasized who Lauren had been, not just how she had died. They reminded the public that behind every legal argument was a real person, a daughter whose voice had been silenced. They acknowledged the complexity of mental illness but maintained that accountability must remain central. They also continued their work through the foundation they had created. Programs expanded. Educational talks reached new audiences. Lauren's name became associated not only with tragedy, but with advocacy and awareness. Her story was used to teach young people about healthy relationships, consent, and the importance of seeking help when emotions become overwhelming. The passage of time did not dull the pain, but it did shape it. Grief became something they carried rather than something that consumed them. They learned to live with absence, even as they refused to let Lauren be reduced to a case file or a cautionary statistic. For those who followed the case closely, one question lingered above all others. Could this have been prevented? Friends replayed conversations. Parents replayed moments. Investigators replayed timelines. There were no simple answers. What remained was the certainty that Lauren had trusted someone she once loved, believing she could safely close a chapter of her life. That trust had been betrayed in the most final way. Her story continued to echo, not as a warning rooted in fear, but as a call to recognize the quiet dangers that can exist behind familiar faces, and the importance of taking emotional warning signs seriously before it is too late. Time moved forward, but Lauren Ashley never became just a memory. She remained present in the lives she had touched, in conversations about love that turns unhealthy, and in the quiet moments when people recognized warning signs they once might have ignored. Her life, though brief, continued to shape choices long after it ended. For her family, the loss never softened. but it transformed. Grief became purpose. Pain became resolve. They spoke Lauren's name not to relive the tragedy, but to affirm who she was: creative, generous, driven, and full of compassion. They refused to let her story be defined solely by the violence that ended it. Lauren had believed in kindness, in helping others, in building something meaningful. In the end, that belief endured through those who remembered her, learned from her story, and chose to protect themselves and others by recognizing the difference between love and control. Her future was taken from her, but her impact was not. And that is how Lauren Ashley is remembered.